My sister lied to my parents, told them I was a prostitute, and they kicked me out of the house. But I didn't give up, and I invited my father and stepmother to my wedding, but not my sister. My name is Mary Parker, and my life started to fall apart when I was 17. It wasn't like some big explosion that tore everything apart all at once. No, it was more like a slow, creeping nightmare that kept getting worse. Looking back, it all began during what was supposed to be a fun family vacation. One of those forced bonding trips my dad thought would magically make everything better between me and my stepsister, Emily. Emily was 14 at the time, and we never really got along. She had always been a bit of a brat, but things were manageable, at least before the trip. We didn't hate each other then, but we weren't friends either. It was the usual sibling tension, or so I thought. But after a huge argument during that trip, things changed, and not for the better. I don't even remember what we were fighting about. Probably something dumb like whose turn it was to take out the trash, but the way she reacted, it was like I had become her worst enemy overnight. We were staying in this beach house my dad had rented. You know, the type with a great view and a private dock. He always tried to overcompensate with expensive trips to make us feel like a real family. It never worked, but he tried. I remember feeling excited at first, hoping maybe this time it'd be different. But Emily, she had other plans. After the argument, she went completely cold, giving me the silent treatment for the rest of the trip. I figured she'd cool down eventually. I was wrong. It wasn't long after we got back from that vacation that Emily went on a warpath. She didn't just stop talking to me. She decided to destroy me. She started telling my dad and stepmom that I was sneaking out late at night, using drugs, even sleeping around. At first, I laughed it off, thinking, there's no way anyone would believe that. But I was wrong. The worst part? They did. They believed every single lie that came out of her mouth. I could see it in the way they looked at me, like I was some kind of stranger, worse, like I was dangerous. It wasn't just suspicion. It was pure distrust. My dad, who used to be my hero, the man I looked up to my whole life, started treating me like I was some delinquent. My stepmom, who was never particularly warm to me to begin with, became flat-out hostile. I'd walk into the kitchen, and their conversation would stop. I'd catch them whispering when they thought I wasn't around, always about me. They watched me like a hawk, waiting for me to slip up. I tried to fight it. I went to my dad, tried to explain, tried to make him see that none of it was true, but nothing I said made any difference. I never touched drugs, never even thought about selling my body. But to them, it didn't matter. Emily had already poisoned their minds, and once she did, there was no going back. My dad even threatened to kick me out. I still remember the look on his face. Cold, angry, like I was a burden he couldn't wait to get rid of. One more screw up, Mary, he said, and you're out of this house. I won't have a junkie under my roof. I felt sick. How could he believe that about me? About his own daughter? It was like walking on eggshells in my own home. Every move I made was questioned. Every late night of studying was seen as sneaking out. It didn't matter that I'd been a good kid, that I'd never given them any real reason to doubt me. They were convinced that I was the problem, that I was somehow ruining everything. No matter what I said, no matter how hard I tried to prove myself, it was like talking to a brick wall. Nothing would change their minds. That's when I realized I was on my own. Part 2. The isolation. Things spiraled quickly after that. It was like I was living in a house full of strangers. My dad and stepmom turned cold, almost overnight, like I was suddenly someone they had to keep an eye on instead of their daughter. Every day felt like I was on trial. And Emily, she was the golden child now. She'd sit there with this smug little grin on her face, watching me unravel. It was like she thrived off the chaos she created. I'd come home from school, and they'd already be waiting for me. Questions lined up, ready to throw at me. Where were you? Who were you with? Why didn't you call? It didn't matter what I said. They didn't trust me. I could have gone straight to a library and back, and they'd still think I was lying. It got to the point where I just locked myself in my room because honestly, there was no point in talking to them anymore. I couldn't even eat dinner with them without feeling their eyes burning holes through me. Every forkful of food, every sip of water, I felt like I was being judged. Sometimes I'd catch them whispering to each other, and the moment I walked in, the room would go dead silent. They didn't even bother hiding it anymore. I wasn't a part of the family, just some outsider they had to deal with. It hurt. It hurt so bad to be treated like that by my own dad. I couldn't understand how he could just switch off like that, how he could believe Emily over me. I mean, she was his stepdaughter. I was his actual daughter. Didn't that mean anything? But no, apparently not. To him, I was the problem, the liar, the disgrace. I didn't have anyone to talk to. My friends noticed I wasn't myself. But how could I explain? How do you tell someone that your own family thinks you're a drug addict and a prostitute? How do you say, hey, by the way, my stepsister's been spreading lies about me, and now my dad wants to kick me out? It was humiliating. So, I just stayed quiet. I shut everyone out because I didn't want anyone to see how messed up my life had become. Eventually, things got worse. Emily's rumors weren't just whispered around the house anymore. They spread. She told people at school. Suddenly, I was the girl everyone was whispering about in the hallways. I'd see groups of people talking, laughing, then they'd look my way and go silent. My phone blew up with anonymous messages, calling me every name you could think of. Some people even asked me for drugs like it was a joke, just to mess with me. I stopped answering altogether. I felt like I couldn't breathe. Everywhere I turned, it was the same. Home wasn't home anymore. School wasn't safe either. And the few people I thought were my friends started pulling away because they didn't want to be associated with the junkie or the slut. I became the outsider everywhere I went. It didn't take long for things to hit a breaking point. I'd been holding on, trying to make it through each day, but there's only so much someone can take. The constant accusations at home, the whispers at school, it was suffocating. I felt like I was losing myself, like I wasn't even Mary anymore, just the person everyone thought I was. The worst night of my life came after one of those relentless family dinners. I hadn't been hungry, but sitting there in silence felt worse than forcing myself to eat. My stepmom was glaring at me from across the table like I was something she scraped off her shoe, while my dad just sat there barely looking at me. Emily was, of course, playing the innocent angel, eating quietly like she hadn't turned my life into hell. I could barely swallow my food. The tension in the air was so thick it felt like I was choking on it. Then it happened. My dad suddenly pushed his plate away and said, "I'm done with this, Mary. I don't know what you think you're doing, but I can't take it anymore. I'm not going to let you drag this family down with your lies and your behavior. Either you straighten up or you're out." My heart dropped. He had never outright said it like that before. There was always this looming threat, but now it was real. I looked at him, pleading silently, hoping he'd see the truth in my eyes. But there was nothing, just coldness. He was already convinced. No amount of begging or explaining was going to change that. "I haven't done anything wrong, Dad," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, but it wavered. "You know me. You know I'm not doing any of the things Emily says I am." I swear. Emily didn't even look up from her plate, but I could see the smirk on her face. She had won, and she knew it. She didn't have to say a word because my dad had already made up his mind. He slammed his fist on the table, making all the dishes jump. "Don't you dare lie to me in my house. I'm sick of your excuses, Mary. One more mess up and you're gone." I mean, at this time, I don't even remember the rest of the dinner. I just remember running to my room and slamming the door, the weight of everything crushing down on me. I wanted to scream, cry, break something, but all I could do was sit there numb. It felt like the walls were closing in, like I was trapped in a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. That night, after hours of tossing and turning, I finally decided to leave. It wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. It was survival. I couldn't stay there anymore. I packed a small bag with whatever I could fit, some clothes, my phone charger, a few personal things. It felt surreal, like I was preparing to leave a life I wasn't ready to give up, but I knew I had no choice. If I stayed, I'd break. Maybe not physically, but mentally, emotionally, I couldn't take it anymore. Before I walked out, I stood in front of my dad's door for a minute, hoping he'd somehow know I was there, that he'd come out and stop me, tell me he was wrong, tell me he still loved me. But there was nothing, just silence. The same cold silence I'd been living with for months. I left quietly, slipping out the front door like a thief in the night. My heart was pounding, but I didn't look back. There was nothing left for me there. I walked down the street in the dark, the only sound my own footsteps echoing through the empty neighborhood. I didn't have a plan. All I knew was that I couldn't go back. As I walked through the quiet, empty streets, The weight of what I'd just done started to settle in. I had left home, if you could even call it that anymore. The place that was supposed to be safe, where I was supposed to feel loved, was the same place that had pushed me out. And now, here I was, walking with nothing but a bag and a heart full of hurt. I ended up at my best friend Katie's house. I hadn't called or texted her, just showed up on her doorstep in the middle of the night. It was risky. For all I knew, she could have heard the rumors too, might have believed them like everyone else. But I had nowhere else to go. I stood there for a moment, trying to gather myself, wiping away the tears that had been silently falling the whole way there. When I finally knocked, it felt like forever before the door opened. Katie answered, half asleep, her face confused until she saw mine. "Mary? What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice hushed but worried. She took one look at me and my bag, and I think she knew. She pulled me inside without asking any more questions and hugged me tight. That was all it took for me to break down completely, sobbing into her shoulder. I hadn't realized how much I needed someone to just be there, someone who didn't doubt me, didn't accuse me, didn't see me as a monster. Katie didn't ask for explanations. She didn't press for details. She just sat with me on her couch, listening to me cry. When I finally managed to tell her everything, about Emily, about my dad, about how I couldn't stay there anymore, Katie looked horrified. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" she whispered, her voice cracking. I shrugged. I didn't want to burden you with all of it. And I didn't know if you'd believe me. Katie's eyes softened, and she grabbed my hand. "Of course, I believe you. You're my best friend, Mary. And screw Emily." I always thought she was a snake. That was the first time I had felt any kind of relief in months. Someone believed me. Someone saw me. It was like a tiny crack of light breaking through the darkness that had been consuming me. Katie let me stay the night, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I fell asleep without that knot of dread in my stomach. But staying with Katie wasn't a permanent solution. I knew I couldn't just crash at her house forever. Her parents were nice, but they weren't about to let me live with them long term. So, the next morning I started looking for a job. I was still in high school, so my options were limited, but I didn't care. I just needed something, anything, to keep me going. I hit up every store and fast food joint within walking distance, filling out applications, trying to act normal when inside. I felt like my whole life had been ripped apart. I didn't hear from my dad or stepmom during those first few days. Part of me thought maybe they'd call. Maybe they'd realize they'd made a mistake. But the phone stayed silent. No texts, no voicemails. It was like I had never existed. After those first few days at Katie's, reality started sinking in. My family wasn't going to call. No one was coming to save me. The house I used to call home didn't want me back, and I had to figure out how to survive on my own. Katie's family let me stay for a bit longer, but I knew it couldn't last. They weren't unkind, but I could feel the tension, like they were wondering how long I'd be there, tiptoeing around the elephant in the room. I didn't blame them. I wasn't their responsibility, after all. So, I kept searching for jobs, more desperate by the day. Finally, I landed one at a local diner. Not glamorous, but it was work. I was hired as a waitress, and honestly, I had no idea what I was doing at first. It was chaotic, balancing trays, dealing with rude customers, trying not to spill drinks everywhere. But I had no choice. I needed the money. It was exhausting, but it felt like a tiny step forward, something I could control. I worked long shifts after school and on weekends, pouring coffee, wiping down tables, and scraping together tips. It wasn't much, but it was enough to save up for a small apartment. It wasn't in the best part of town, but I didn't care. It was mine. A dingy little place with peeling wallpaper and a leaky faucet, but it felt like freedom. For the first time since everything had fallen apart, I had a space where I didn't have to look over my shoulder, didn't have to feel like a stranger in my own home. The first night in that apartment, I sat on the floor, surrounded by unpacked boxes, just staring at the walls. It was quiet, the kind of silence that used to feel heavy and unbearable, but now it was a relief. No more accusations, no more cold stares from my dad, no more smug looks from Emily. Just me in my own little world. I didn't have much, a mattress on the floor, a few mismatched pieces of furniture, and my clothes stuffed into garbage bags. But it was enough. Katie came over a lot at first, helping me get settled, bringing me food because I could barely afford groceries after paying rent. We'd sit on the floor with takeout, talking about everything and nothing, trying to act like things were normal. She kept telling me I was brave, that she couldn't believe how strong I was for getting through all of it. But honestly, I didn't feel strong. I felt broken. I miss my dad. God, I missed him so much. But I couldn't go back. Not after everything. As time went on, I started to build a routine. School, work, and then back to my little apartment. It wasn't easy, but it kept me going. It gave me something to focus on other than the pain of what I'd lost. I was barely making ends meet, but at least I wasn't on the streets. I was surviving, and that had to count for something. But no matter how hard I tried to move forward, the past still haunted me. Every time I walked by a family in the diner, laughing and eating together, it reminded me of what I'd lost. Every time I saw a father and daughter, I felt that sharp stab of jealousy, wondering why I couldn't have that anymore. Why did my dad believe the lies? Why didn't he fight for me? These thoughts circled my mind late at night, lying awake in the quiet of my empty apartment. Months passed, and I started to settle into my new life. The pain wasn't gone, but it had dulled, becoming part of the background noise in my mind. I threw myself into work and school, trying to keep my head above water. It wasn't much of a life, but it was mine, and I'd learned to be okay with that. I had no choice. Then, out of nowhere, something happened that I never expected. Emily's ex-boyfriend, Jason, reached out to me. I hadn't talked to him in ages, and I didn't even know he still had my number. So, when I saw his name pop up on my phone, I almost didn't answer. I had no idea what he could possibly want, but curiosity got the best of me. "Hey, Mary, I know this is weird, but can we talk?" His voice sounded uneasy, like he wasn't sure if he should be calling me. "What's this about, Jason?" I asked, suspicion creeping in. After everything that had happened, I wasn't in the mood for any more drama. I don't know how to say this, but it's about Emily," he started. My heart sank. Emily? What could she possibly have to do with me now? I thought I had left that nightmare behind. "What about her?" I said, my voice colder than I intended. He sighed, and there was a pause on the other end of the line. "She told me some stuff about you. She admitted it was all lies, Mary. The rumors, the things she said about you to your family, it was all because she was jealous. She told me everything." For a second, I couldn't breathe. My mind went blank, and I just stood there, holding the phone frozen. All the lies she'd spread, all the pain she'd caused, it had been out of jealousy? I felt my blood boiling, and the anger that I'd kept buried for so long started to rise to the surface. She admitted it? I managed to choke out. She actually admitted she ruined my life because she was jealous? "Yeah," Jason said, his voice apologetic. "I'm really sorry, Mary. I didn't know at the time, and I should have said something sooner, but I didn't think it was my place. I just thought you should know." I hung up without saying another word. My hands were shaking, and I felt like I was going to explode. Emily had confessed. She knew what she had done to me, and she didn't care. She had let me go through hell, all because of some petty jealousy. For a brief moment, I thought about confronting my dad and stepmom, shoving the truth in their faces and making them see how wrong they had been. I imagined storming into their house, throwing it all back at them. How they had turned on me, how they had believed every awful thing Emily said without even giving me a chance. I wanted to scream at them, to make them feel the pain they had caused me. But then, just as quickly, that thought faded. What good would it do? Even if I had the truth in my hands, they wouldn't take it back. They had already made their choice, and I had learned the hard way that I didn't matter to them as much as Emily did. My dad had chosen her lies over my truth once, and I had no reason to believe he wouldn't do it again. I sat down on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall, trying to calm the storm inside me. What would reopening that chapter of my life really do? It wouldn't erase the months of feeling abandoned, the nights of crying myself to sleep, or the constant struggle to survive on my own. It wouldn't undo the damage. And I realized in that moment I didn't want them back. I didn't need their apologies. They had shown me who they were, and I had survived without them. I deleted Jason's number and blocked him, too. I wasn't interested in hearing more about Emily or giving her any more space in my life. I made the choice right then and there to let it all go. Reopening old wounds wouldn't heal them. I had already spent enough time hurting. It was time to move on. After hearing the truth from Jason, a strange sense of calm washed over me. It wasn't the kind of peace that comes from forgiveness or closure. No, it was the kind of calm that comes from finally accepting that some doors need to stay closed. I realized that even though I had proof now, it wasn't worth reopening the wounds with my family. They'd made their choice, and I had to live with that. For the first time in months, I didn't feel that ache of wanting to be understood, to be believed. I didn't feel the desperate pull to fix things, to go back to how life was before Emily's lies shattered everything. The truth was, there was no going back. My family had chosen who they wanted to believe, and it wasn't me. It stung, but I wasn't going to let it break me anymore. I had a new life now, a messy, imperfect, but real life that I had built on my own. I had survived without their support, without their trust, and I wasn't about to let them back in just because Emily had finally admitted the truth. I made the decision that night to cut ties completely. No more holding on to hope that they'd reach out. No more waiting for an apology that would never come. I blocked my dad's and stepmom's numbers, deleted their contacts from my phone, and unfollowed them on social media. It felt final, but in a good way, like ripping off a bandage after the wound is healed. There was no reason to keep looking back. Katie noticed the change in me. One afternoon, she stopped by my apartment, bringing along some takeout like she always did. We sat on the floor, eating Chinese food out of the cartons, and she gave me a curious look. "You seem different," she said between bites of fried rice. "Like in a good way. What's going on?" I shrugged, but I couldn't hide the small smile creeping onto my face. "I guess I'm just done, Done with all of it. Emily, my dad, everything. I don't need them anymore." Katie's eyes softened, and she smiled back. "Good. You deserve better than all of that." She paused, then added, "So, what now? What's next for you?" That was the question, wasn't it? I had spent so long just trying to survive, to keep my head above water, that I hadn't really thought about what came next. Now that I wasn't weighed down by the past, I realized I had room to think about the future. "I don't know," I admitted. "But for once, that doesn't scare me. I think I'm ready to start figuring it out." Katie grinned and held up her takeout box in a mock toast. "Here's to figuring things out." We clinked our boxes together, laughing. It was a small, silly moment, but it felt like a turning point. For the first time in a long time, I felt like my life was mine again, not something defined by the lies of others or the family that had abandoned me. It was just mine, messy and uncertain as it was. A few weeks later, life threw me a curveball, but this time, it wasn't a bad one. I met Josh. He was a regular at the diner where I worked, always sitting at the same corner booth with a book and a cup of coffee. At first, I didn't pay much attention to him, just another customer. But after a few weeks of small talk, I realized he wasn't like the others. He didn't just see me as a waitress bringing him his order. He saw me, asked about my day, laughed at my dumb jokes. There was a kindness in his eyes that I hadn't seen in anyone in a long time. One night after my shift ended, Josh stayed behind, waiting for me outside. "You're too good for this place," he said with a grin, leaning against the wall. "How about we go grab a real meal somewhere?" I was caught off guard but smiled anyway. "A real meal? You think diner food isn't the height of culinary excellence?" He chuckled. "I mean, it's got its charm, but I think you deserve better." "What do you say?" I said yes. That night was the first time in what felt like forever that I let my guard down. We talked for hours over dinner, sharing stories about our lives, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel the weight of everything I'd been through. I felt like a regular person, just enjoying the company of someone who cared about getting to know me. Josh wasn't pushy, wasn't trying to fix me or pry into my past. He was just there, present. And for the first time, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, I could have something good again. Something real. That night, as I lay in bed, I realized I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living, and it felt damn good. After that first dinner with Josh, things started to change in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't like some instant fairy tale where everything was suddenly perfect. But it was real, and that was what mattered. Josh became someone I could lean on without feeling like I was a burden. He didn't pry into my past, didn't push for answers. He let me tell him things when I was ready, and that made all the difference. We started seeing more of each other casually at first. Just coffee here, dinner there. But with every conversation, I found myself opening up a little more, trusting him with pieces of me that I hadn't shared with anyone since everything had fallen apart. It wasn't easy at first, letting someone in again after everything I'd been through. But Josh had a way of making me feel safe. Like I wasn't broken, just bruised. Like I could heal. One night, after a few months of dating, we were sitting in my tiny apartment, eating pizza and watching some dumb comedy movie. We weren't even paying attention to the screen, just talking, laughing, and enjoying the simplicity of being together. Out of nowhere, he turned to me, his eyes serious but warm. "Mary," he said, his voice softer than usual. "You know I'm here for you, right? Whatever you're dealing with, you don't have to carry it alone. I'll be here no matter what." I felt a lump rise in my throat. No one had ever said that to me before. Not like that. Not with such certainty. Like he meant every single word. I could feel the walls I had built up starting to crack, the ones I'd put in place to protect myself from getting hurt again. "I don't know if I can believe that yet," I admitted quietly, staring at the pizza box on the floor. "It's hard to trust people after everything." Josh didn't push me. He just nodded, understanding in his eyes. "That's okay," he said. "You don't have to believe it all right now. I'll wait." That's when I knew Josh wasn't like the people I had known before. He wasn't going to bail when things got hard, or turn his back on me the way my family had. He wasn't going to treat me like a problem that needed fixing or a burden he was stuck with. He was patient, kind, and most importantly, he was someone I could finally see a future with. As things between us grew more serious, we started talking about the future, about what we both wanted, about what life could look like if we were together for the long haul. For the first time in a long time, I felt hope. Not the fragile kind that I've been clinging to for survival, but real, solid hope that maybe, just maybe, things are going to be okay. That I could build something better than the mess I had come from. It wasn't long before Josh and I decided to move in together. I hesitated at first, scared that something would go wrong. That maybe I'd lose this good thing like I had lost everything else. But Josh was patient, never pushing, always letting me take things at my own pace. Eventually, the fear subsided, and excitement took its place. We found a small apartment, nothing fancy, but it felt like home the moment we stepped inside. Moving in with Josh was different from anything I'd ever experienced. For the first time, I felt like I was part of a team, like I wasn't just surviving alone. We split everything: rent, groceries, chores, but more than that, we shared our lives. We talked about everything, even the hard stuff. Especially the hard stuff. One night, sitting in our new place after unpacking boxes, I finally told Josh everything. About Emily, about the rumors, about how my family had turned on me without a second thought. I told him about how I'd been kicked out, how I'd struggled to find my way, how I'd had to build my life from the ground up with nothing. I thought maybe he'd get overwhelmed. Maybe this would be too much for him. But he just sat there listening, never interrupting, never judging. When I was done, Josh pulled me close, holding me like he'd never let go. "I'm so sorry you had to go through that," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "But you're stronger than you know, Mary. And none of that defines who you are now." I didn't realize how much I needed to hear that until he said it. For so long, I'd felt like I was carrying the weight of everything on my own, like I was still that broken girl who had been betrayed and abandoned. But with Josh, I didn't feel broken anymore. I felt whole. For the first time, I believed that I deserved the happiness I was finding with him. Our life together wasn't perfect, but it was real. We fought sometimes about stupid things like whose turn it was to do the dishes or what to watch on TV. But we always worked it out. And the best part? I never felt like I was walking on eggshells. I wasn't waiting for the other shoe to drop, for him to suddenly change his mind about me like my family had. As the months went by, Josh became more than just the guy I was in love with. He became my family. And I realized something. I didn't need my dad's approval. I didn't need my stepmom's acceptance or Emily's lies to define me anymore. I had built something better, something real. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free. As life with Josh settled into something steady and comforting, I started to feel more and more like my old self, the version of me that existed before everything fell apart. He made me feel safe, loved, and finally free from the shadows of my past. So when he proposed one rainy afternoon, Kneeling in the middle of our cluttered living room with a ring that wasn't flashy but was perfect for me, I didn't hesitate. I said yes, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had a future worth looking forward to. Planning the wedding was exciting, but it also brought back feelings I hadn't expected. There were moments where I would catch myself thinking, should I invite my dad? Should I try one last time to fix things? Part of me still longed for the family I had lost, especially on a day as important as my wedding. No matter how much I tried to convince myself I didn't care anymore, there was still that nagging part of me that wanted them to see who I'd become, to witness the life I'd built in spite of everything. After a lot of back and forth, I decided to send an invitation to my dad and stepmom. It felt like the right thing to do, even if they hadn't been there for me when I needed them most. Maybe I thought this could be a step towards some kind of reconciliation. I didn't expect much, but a small part of me hoped they'd at least show up, acknowledge that I had moved on and made something of my life. But I didn't invite Emily. That was a line I refused to cross. She had caused too much pain, and I wasn't about to have her anywhere near me on a day that was supposed to be about love and new beginnings. A few days after sending out the invites, I got the call. It was my dad. I hadn't heard his voice in over a year, and hearing it again made my stomach twist in knots. He wasn't calling to apologize or to congratulate me, though. No, he had something else to say. I got the invitation, he said, his voice stiff, like he was holding back something. But I noticed Emily wasn't on the guest list. I closed my eyes, already knowing where this was going. Yeah, she's not invited, Dad. I don't want her there. There was a pause on the other end. Well, Mary, that's going to be a problem. Emily's part of this family, and if she's not welcome, then I don't think I can come either. I felt my heart drop. It shouldn't have surprised me, but somehow it still hurt like hell. You're really going to choose her over me? Again, I asked, my voice shaky with disbelief. Mary, it's not about choosing sides, he said, though we both knew it was. It's about family. If you're serious about mending things, you have to include her. Otherwise, I can't be there. That was it. The ultimatum. I could either let the person who had destroyed my life be part of my wedding, or I could have my dad there. There was no in-between. No middle ground. And for the first time, I realized just how little had changed. My dad still didn't see me. He still didn't believe in me enough to take my side. Not even after everything Emily had done. I felt my hands shaking as I gripped the phone. If you can't come without her, then don't bother coming at all, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm done bending over backward to make you see my worth. I deserve better than this. There was a long, heavy silence on the other end. And then, quietly, my dad said, I'm sorry, Mary. I hope you'll change your mind. But I didn't. I wouldn't. After hanging up, I sat there in stunned silence, feeling a mix of anger, sadness, and relief. It felt like the final blow, the last nail in the coffin of whatever family ties I had left. And it hurt. It hurt more than I wanted to admit. But at the same time, I felt something lift off my chest. The weight of trying to win my dad's approval, of trying to mend something that was beyond fixing, was finally gone. When I told Josh what had happened, he didn't try to offer empty platitudes. He didn't tell me it would be okay or that my dad would come around. He just held me tight and steady like a rock in the middle of a storm. You did the right thing, he said softly, kissing the top of my head. You don't need them. Not anymore. And he was right. I didn't. My family wasn't the people who had abandoned me when I needed them the most. My family was the people who stood by me, who believed in me even when I struggled to believe in myself. My family was Katie, who had opened her home to me when I had nowhere else to go. It was Josh, who loved me without conditions, without ultimatums. The wedding day came, and it was beautiful. Small, intimate, filled with the people who mattered most. My dad and stepmom weren't there, and honestly, it didn't matter. The people who showed up were the ones who had been there for me all along. As I stood there, hand in hand with Josh, promising to love and cherish him for the rest of my life, I realized I wasn't sad anymore. I wasn't angry or bitter about the family that had chosen someone else over me. I was at peace. I had created a new life, a new family, one that was built on love and trust. And for the first time in years, I felt truly free.